Well, I hope you're sitting comfortably because I bought something very special today. Ta-da! Yes, it's the Daily Mail, because as you are not aware, the Brexit saga, or the Brexit Train, is just a track that never ends. And of course, who better to extol the furore and outrage better than the Daily Mail? So here we have the leading headline: Enemies of the People, fury over out-of-touch judges who defy 17.4 million Brexit voters and could trigger a constitutional crisis. That's so fun. Now, I love it because they've sort of named the judges that they're complaining about are Sir Terence Ethelthorne, the fencer, the worked with Tony Blair, Lord Justice Sales, and the Euro Law Club, Lord Chief Justice Thomas. Now, for those of you who don't know what has happened, let me just give you a quick fill-in. There's been a debate pretty much since Brexit happened of can the Prime Minister trigger Article 50 without Parliament? And it basically boils down to, does Parliament need to vote? And the High Court has ruled yes, constitutionally, and this is the key point, even though the Daily Mail says it's not, constitutionally, Parliament does need to vote on Article 50. And this is great news because this could stop Brexit happening. Because as I've said from the very beginning, if this ever had actually been a parliamentary vote like it should have been, it would not have happened. MPs would have voted unanimously to stay in. Why? Because we get lots of benefits from the EU. And guess what? They're the ones to know. I'd like to reference Dan Jarvis. Up until the lead in to the Brexit on the Facebook page he was constantly saying, these are all the things Barnsley has gotten from the EU. And yet people were just like, no, not convinced. And I'm just like, so now here we are, a couple of months down the line, and yes, constitutionally, we do need to vote. This is not a constitutional crisis, as the Daily Mail has pointed out to be, but let's look into their furore and hoo-ha that they are spinning now. Last night, MPs tore into 3 out-of-touch judges for ruling that embittered Remainers in Parliament should be allowed to frustrate the verdict of the British public. No, as they ruled, and they ruled with law, and they ruled with precedent that has been set in the Constitution that we have. This is perfectly legal. This is not a big hoo-ha, so to say. But anyway, they continue. The Lord Chief Justice and 2 senior colleagues were accused of putting Britain on a course of a full-blown constitutional crisis by saying Brexit could not be triggered without a Westminster vote. The judgment of Lord Thomas, a founding member of the European Law Institute, a club of lawyers and academics aiming to improve EU law, throws into chaos Miss May's timetable for invoking Article 50 in March next year. So here we have a case of, if you actually look at what they have done, they have actually, and the reason that this EU law club was actually created was because they wanted to help improve EU laws and, in a way, aid Britain. And yet, this is a bad thing, apparently. And even then, bear in mind, the EU is still going to be a thing, and it's going to be even worse because we can't have any effect on laws. So having people who are knowledgeable about EU laws is going to be incredibly effective, just as it is now, and even if we do leave. Senior MPs led by ex-Justice Minister said it was an outrage and an unholy alliance of judges and embittered Remain backers could thwart the wishes of 17.4 million Leave voters. What about the other ones that voted to Remain? Remember, this was a very narrow margin. There was 6 million votes, I think it was, in it. So it was incredibly close. And remember, Nigel Farage said that if this had been the other way around, there'd be enough case to have a redo. So there you go. They warned that Mrs. May could be forced to hold an election early next year if the courts did not back down. I don't see why she should be forced to hold an election, but there you go. I think that, we're 2 years in now, I think? Are we 2 years? Time flies. Time flies. So anyway, Leave campaigners said the judges had... Oh, hang on. Yep. Here we are. The judges had declared war on democracy on an extraordinary day of drama. What they've ruled on is actually part of our democracy, Daily Mail. You don't seem to be acknowledging that, and that this is, and what they've ruled on, and why they ruled in favour of it, was because there is a precedent for it. So, sorry. Brexit Secretary David Davis warned that judges and MPs not to defy the will of the British public. They can do, they have every right to, because MPs should rule and vote in favour not only of just the public, but the greater good of the country that we are. And everything is pointing, and has pointed right from the beginning, as staying in the EU is a good idea and sound. So, where are we at? Gloating Remainers took to social media to boast about a victory for democracy, which it was. MPs predicted the chaos could delay Brexit by up to a year. Judges left the door open to the taxpayer being saddled with a hefty legal bill for costs. A group of pro-Remain Tory and Labour's MPs met to plot how the ruling could be used to force Mrs. May to reveal more about her broad negotiation aims, which she should, because if we are going to leave, then we need to know on what terms we are going to leave. This is something that should be discussed in Parliament, because if we do leave and it's an absolute, shambles, which you look at every single expert is saying it is, then we need to discuss these. And I'm sorry, it needs to happen. Even if you are an adamant Leave voter, you need to have a decent set of what is going to happen, because no one knows what's going to happen. And all the forecasts and everything said, if we just up and leave, it's going to be absolute chaos. And you're going to damage the UK irreparably for a decade, if not more. Where are we? Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon threatened to join the legal action in a bid to frustrate Brexit. Brexiteers pointed out that a 19 million taxpayer-funded leaflet sent to every home clearly stated that the referendum result would be followed directly by ministers. Don't remember that leaflet. Don't remember getting it. Bookmakers shorten the odds on a 2017 general election to 2-1. The row exploded yesterday morning when a panel led by Lord Chief Justice Thomas ruled that Mrs May cannot trigger Article 50, the formal 2-year process of leaving the EU, without a vote by Parliament. This is despite a clear commitment by the government during the referendum to enact the public's verdict without delay. A furious Number 10 vowed to challenge and dispute the disappointing decision in the Supreme Court next month. I have a friend who's big into like constitutional law, and he's like, he was all from the beginning. He's been constantly saying, yeah, it's not going to happen without voting Parliament, and they literally have just set, as they've said, the reason why they ruled this way was because there is already a precedent set, laid down in our constitution, as well as other things that say, yes, Parliament must vote for this type of thing. So, sorry, that's democracy. Those are the rules that we have. And to those that are crying about how our, this is sort of the end of democracy, these are the rules of the democracy that you live in. Evidently, you don't know the democracy that you live in. Where are we? Yeah. The Supreme Court judges were left in no doubt what was at stake. Mr Davis said that if yesterday's verdict was upheld, a full Act of Parliament would be required to trigger Brexit. This would allow MPs or peers to table amendments that would allow them to dictate the terms of Brexit or even halt the process altogether. Mr Davis said heading down this path would be a huge mistake. The outpouring of rage against the High Court judge's shocking decision was so strong at Westminster that there were calls for reviews into a way that senior judges are appointed. Whitehall sources also reveal that the judges gave the government barely an hour's notice of their bombshell verdict. Usually ministers can expect an overnight warning. Insiders said that Mrs May and the ministers are in charge of Brexit have been enraged and now hope that the Supreme Court will see sense. It will hear Mrs May's appeal from December 7th with a verdict highly likely before Christmas. Ex-Attorney General Dominic Grieve, a leading Remain campaigner, claimed this could delay her pledge to start the 2-year process for quitting the EU until March 2017. One minister claimed that the delay could take up to a year. The High Court verdict hinged on the interpretation of British constitutional law. The government lawyers said that in the wake of the June 23rd referendum result, Mrs May had a prerogative powers to trigger. She had the powers to trigger Article 50 without a vote by MPs. Not according to the constitutional law. But the panel of judges yesterday determined the government does not have the power under the Crown's prerogative to give notice pursuant to Article 50 for the UK to withdraw from the European Union. They added that triggering Article 50 would fundamentally change the UK's people's rights, and that the government cannot change or do away with any rights under UK law unless Parliament gives it the authority to do so. And that is why there needs to be a vote. Sorry. Condemnation of the verdict, which few had expected, was swift and devastating. MPs point out that it had been brought about by embittered Remain voters and wealthy fund managers who had formed an unholy alliance with the judiciary. If the government appeals is not successful, an Act of Parliament will be required to trigger Article 50. This will allow MPs or the unelected House of Lords to put down amendments denying Article 50, instead insisting Britain must remain in the single market or block its passage altogether. Ex-Justice Minister Dominic Raab said on June 23rd, the British people gave a clear mandate for the UK government to leave the EU. Well, it wasn't clear. It was, again, as we've said, it was very close. And again, quoting Nigel Farage, who said, if this had been the other way around, that he said there would be a very clear case for another referendum. This causes a pain attempt to block the Brexit by people who are out of touch with the country and refuse to accept the result. He added that an unholy alliance of die-hard Remain campaigners and fund managers of an unelected judiciary and the House of Lords must not be allowed to thwart the wishes of the British public. It would trigger a constitutional crisis if the Supreme Court upheld the vague and undemocratic verdict. No, it's not, because the views just stated in your own thing that they said that triggering Article 50 would fundamentally change the UK people's rights, and that the government cannot change or do away with rights under UK law unless Parliament gives it the authority to do so. Which is why you cannot trigger Article 50 without a vote. Ian Duncan Smith, the former Work and Pension Secretary, said that the judges had capitalised a constitutional crisis, literally putting Parliament against the will of the people. UKIP's Nigel Farage said, "I now fear every attempt will be made to block or delay the triggering of Article 50. This is something that I have no idea of the public anger they will provoke." Leading Leave campaigner Douglas Carswell said that the shocking judicial activism, these judges are politicians without accountability. No, judges are answerable to the law. And under the UK law, as you've said, Daily Mail, that because Article 50 will basically, if we invoke Article 50, the rights of the UK populace, we the people, will change. And as a result, Article 50 cannot be revoked or in any way changed. Rights cannot be taken away unless given so by the authority of Parliament. That, friends, is the Constitution and democracy we live in. So, thank you, game, set and match. I'm looking forward to the halting of Brexit because, God, it needs to stop. It really does. So, we'll keep an eye on it, although next time I won't be buying it. Although, considering it only cost me 65 pence, it was alright. But like I say, I only bought it for the front page, but there you go.